The Avos and by extension the Shvatim kept the entire Torah before it was given, and yet there's something very unique about how Yosef kept Shabbos before there was such a thing as Shabbos. That's because of who Yosef was. And it also teaches us something about a deeper layer of Shabbos that we need to include in our Shabbos experience. Where do we learn this all from? Pasuk Vayar Yosef Gomer. The pasuk tells us that Yosef saw his brothers, that they'd all come with Binyamin. Vayomer Asher Abeis Gomer. He tells the person in charge of his household that they should prepare food, utovoyach tevach, and he should shecht meat, v'hachein Gomer, and prepare a meal. So based on that, Isa Medrash, the Medrash Bereshis Rabbi tells us that word v'hachein and prepare, ein v'hachein el Shabbos. That only refers to preparations for Shabbos. Omar, as we say in the pasuk with regards to the mon, on the sixth day they prepared what they were going to have on Shabbos after they were told that there's such a thing as Shabbos. And from here we learn, says the Medrash, that Yosef observed Shabbos even before Shabbos was given. Now you could easily misunderstand what the Medrash is saying. If you read this at face value, you could make a terrible mistake. That the Medrash is distinguishing between Yosef's dedication to Torah mitzvahs compared to his brothers. Or you could think that the Medrash is distinguishing here between how Yosef kept Shabbos versus how Yosef kept other mitzvahs. And therefore you would think, that Yosef is the one who kept Shabbos, but not the other brothers. And as a Shabbos Shomer, you could also understand that it meant that Yosef kept Shabbos, Avashar mitzvahs loy shomer, but he did not observe other mitzvahs. Now that would be a misunderstanding of the Medrash. That is not possible. Why not? Because because we know that Chazal tell us that our forefathers kept the entire Torah, even though they were not instructed to do so. And not only did they keep it, but Avram, we're told about Avram Avinu that his greatness was that he instructed his family and his household to fulfill the mitzvahs that he himself was committed to. And so if that's how Avram Avinu conducted himself, Yaakov must have done the same. So surely Yaakov also instructed all of his sons to keep all the mitzvahs before the Torah was given. In fact, Rashi says this clearly in his commentary on Gemara, that the sons of Yaakov were people who observed mitzvahs. Even though the Torah had not been formally given, they had a tradition passed down from their forefathers, and they observed that tradition. So it's absolutely clear that it's not only Yosef and it's not only Shabbos, but it's all the Shvatim keeping all of the mitzvahs. So what's the Medrash telling us? So the Medrash is clearly not illustrating that Yosef did not keep other mitzvahs besides Shabbos, nor that the Shvatim did not keep mitzvahs, including Shabbos. Rather, the Medrash is telling us that we know that Yosef kept Shabbos from a specific pasuk. Whereas all the other mitzvahs that Yosef kept, as well as the fact that the other brothers kept Shabbos and the other mitzvahs, is not something that is said clearly in the pasuk. So that's what the Medrash is drawing our attention to, that the pasuk is specifying that Yosef kept Shabbos, and of course that indicates that there's something special about Yosef keeping Shabbos, and we need to understand what that is. Now the truth is, the same concept is taught in another part of the Bereshis Rabbah as well. The fact that there's something unique about how Yosef kept Shabbos is mentioned elsewhere in the Medrash, where it says as follows, quoting the pasuk from Eov that says, "Mi hikti mani v'ashelem," who preempted me, says David, that I should have to pay him or reward him. And there the Medrash says, Yosef, it's actually saying it in a positive sense, that Yosef went ahead and did something before it was required. That Yosef was committed to keep Shabbos even before it was given. How do we know it? It quotes the same pasuk. The pasuk tells us that he instructed his house manager to prepare food. And Rabbi Yochanan says this was on a Friday. And the expression v'achein is specifically about preparing for Shabbos. As again the other Medrash told us, we learn from the Mon that on the sixth day they prepared for the Shabbos. But here comes the part that is unique. There the Medrash adds more information. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in response to the fact that Yosef kept Shabbos, the Eibishter says, Yosef, you, Yosef, committed yourself to observe Shabbos even before the Torah was given. I'm going to reward you for that. I promise you that your great-grandson, Shevet Ephraim, is going to bring their korban for Chanukas HaMizbeach on a Shabbos. So now we see that there's something special about Yosef's observance of Shabbos. We need to know what that is. So this medrash implies the fact that there's something unique about Yosef keeping Shabbos more so than any of the other mitzvahs. Because it's not only because the Torah tells us specifically about it in this parasha, but there had to be something about what Yosef did in keeping Shabbos that is unique, different, and beyond all the other mitzvahs that he did. And that there's something about Yosef keeping Shabbos which is unique even compared to his brothers keeping Shabbos. How do we know this? Because look at the result. That it's specifically a descendant of Yosef that has a special reward related to keeping Shabbos that tells us that Yosef's observance of Shabbos is special. And in fact, actually that would be the reason why the Torah specifies that Yosef kept Shabbos, to draw attention to the fact that the way in which Yosef observed Shabbos is unique, even compared to his own mitzvahs, and even compared to his brothers keeping Shabbos. We got to ask ourselves, what did Yosef do that's so special? But we need to understand. What is so special about Yosef keeping Shabbos compared to all of his brothers doing the same thing? And where do you see it in the words of this pasuk of shechting and preparing the meat for Shabbos? Also, plus, that word that's used in both parts of the Medrash Rabbah, that v'hochein, prepare, is telling us that it must be Shabbos. We need to understand that. Because for Pashtus Yesh Lefarish, the simplest way to explain it would be as follows. It sounds like what's happening over here is the Torah is telling us that Yosef instructs his household to prepare the food for Shabbos before Shabbos. So we'd then extrapolate, if they have to prepare the food before Shabbos, that's obviously because they are not permitted to prepare the food on Shabbos, through cooking, etc. And now we know that Yosef keeps Shabbos. Now, that sounds a little convoluted as a proof that Yosef keeps Shabbos. So we need to understand. Why does the Medrash give us such a convoluted route to understanding that Yosef kept Shabbos? How do I know he kept Shabbos? Because he prepared food the day before, which implies that he couldn't prepare the food on the day. The fact that he prepared food before tells us that he couldn't do it on Shabbos. Now, surely the Torah could have been much more direct. Surely the Torah could have given us a much clearer way of knowing that Yosef keeps Shabbos. And in fact, we actually have another medrash that gives us a more direct way. Let's see what the Mechilta says. We actually find the Mechilta describing this concept that Yosef kept Shabbos, but it says so in a completely different way. The Mechilta says the fact that Yosef prepared the food for Shabbos before Shabbos, that is a fulfillment of a direct mitzvah of the observance of Shabbos. By preparing food in advance, he's remembering Shabbos, which is mandated by the Aseret HaDibros, and it's part of the way that you observe Shabbos. You've got to prepare the food for Shabbos in advance, and he's doing that. Because as we well know, the whole concept of remembering Shabbos is that you prepare for Shabbos in advance. As the Mechilta says further, and we know this very well, that from this pasuk that says remember Shabbos, we learn that that from the first day of the week you should already be thinking about and remembering Shabbos. That if you find a good portion of food, put it aside for Shabbos. So that would be much clearer. How do we know that Yosef keeps Shabbos? Because look, he's got his food ready for Shabbos in advance, which fulfills part of the mitzvah Shabbos. Why does the Medrash Rabbah go in such a roundabout route and say the fact that he's preparing on Shabbos tells us he couldn't prepare on Shabbos, therefore it means he kept Shabbos? Make it simpler. So, in order to understand that, we have to first understand what is this expression that the Medrash used, that Yosef kept Shabbos before it was given. So the Medrash is clearly adding words and emphasizing of Yashashmiras Shabbos to Yosef Hoysa, that what was unique about Yosef's observance of Shabbos is that it was koidem shaloi tinasen, that it happened before Shabbos was given. The kasha, let's be honest, We know that. We know history. We understand that this is before Matan Torah. Why do you have to tell me this information? As the Yefei Torah, one of the commentaries of the Medrash points out, what's it telling us? It's pretty clear that in the time of Yosef, Shabbos wasn't yet given, the Torah wasn't yet given, the Mon hadn't yet happened, and Mara hadn't yet happened, the three occasions where we're told about Shabbos. So the Yefei Torah answers, because you would think maybe if Shabbos hadn't yet been given, you're actually forbidden to keep Shabbos. Because the Gemara Sanhedrin tells us that if a non-Jewish person observes Shabbos, it's a capital offense. How do we know that? Because at the time of Noach, which is when we consolidate what the responsibilities are for the rest of the world, before the Torah was given, you're not actually permitted to take a break from work. Therefore, maybe the Medrash had to tell us that he had to actually do something unique by keeping Shabbos. In other words, you wouldn't have expected it, you would have thought it was illegal, and the fact is that Yosef went ahead and did it. And the Yefei Torah also alludes to the fact that the Shvatim, as the Avos, were not actually classified as Bnei Noach, so therefore they didn't have the same restriction. Okay, so that's the Yefei Torah's explanation of why it has to tell us that it was before Shabbos was given. The truth is, if that's what the Medrash wanted to say, could have used words that would have emphasized that point more clearly. Rather than emphasizing the fact that Shabbos had not yet been presented to the world, rather it should have said that Shabbos would be in the future given to the Jewish people, which would have addressed the Yefei Torah's concerns that maybe Yosef is not considered technically Jewish and shouldn't be keeping Shabbos. So this concept that a non-Jew is not supposed to keep Shabbos and is a capital offense is not only then, at that point in history, but it applies today also, after Matan Torah. So the Medrash should have spoken a language that speaks to this point. Could go in, for example, that Yosef kept Shabbos even though it's something which is only given to the Jewish nation, implying after the giving of the Torah, or something along those lines. So we're back to square one. Why the emphasis on the fact that he observed Shabbos before it had been given? So well, it's because the word given is the key term over here. If I'm going to talk about giving something, the thing I'm giving must already exist. And the giving, the transaction, all it does is it's taking that object from a certain place or somebody's jurisdiction and transferring it to another place or to somebody else's jurisdiction. That's what Nesina means. So embedded in the word Nesina is that this already exists. So if we're going to say that Yosef kept Shabbos before Shabbos was given, the implication is Shabbos as a concept already exists, and that's relevant to our understanding. The fact that the Medrash is emphasizing that Yosef keeps Shabbos before Shabbos is given, as the other Medrash says, move on. That means that Shabbos exists before the giving of the Torah, and at a certain point in history, Shabbos is then given to us. Now let's understand what that means, that Shabbos exists, and then it's given to us. So the explanation is, let's ask ourselves, why do we keep Shabbos? Now, the first thing that comes to mind why we keep Shabbos is because that's the nature of how Hashem created the world. One of the reasons why we remember and observe Shabbos, because the pasuk tells us, that in 6 days the Eibusha created heaven and earth, and he rested on the seventh. As the other pasuk says, that on the seventh day he rested and rejuvenated. Move on. So that tells you something. That's a description of what happened at the time of creation. We're already identifying Shabbos at the time of creation. Move on. That tells you that right from the 6 days of creation, Shabbos is in a unique category that is distinct from every other day of the week. And the Torah tells us that right away in Bereshis, in the story of creation. That this is the day that the Eibishter rested, as opposed to the other 6 days where the Eibishter is creating. And it's a day that the Eibishter blesses and he sanctifies. Because that's the day that he rested from all of his work. So that is the origin of Shabbos. The instruction to us to keep Shabbos The instruction that we should keep Shabbos was given only after the Jewish people were redeemed from Egypt. But Matan Torah, primarily at the giving of the Torah, but the truth is even before that, but if Nezeh b'Morah, Lachar Yetzias Mitzrayim, they were actually already given the laws of Shabbos in Morah, but still after they left Mitzrayim. Kamoi. As the Rambam points out in Moreh Nevuchim, that there are two phases to Shabbos. There's the concept of Shabbos and the instruction for Shabbos. He explains, why is it that the Torah, in the two sets of Aseret HaDibros, actually gives us two motivations for why we should keep Shabbos. In the Parashas Yisro, when we first encountered Aseret HaDibros, the reason for Shabbos is because they created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. Over Mishnah Torah, when we encountered Aseret HaDibros again in Parashas Vayischanan, then we're told that you have to keep Shabbos. You have to remember that you were a slave in Egypt, which is why the Eibush has commanded you to keep Shabbos. So the Rambam says, why do we have two different reasons given to motivate for Shabbos? And he explains, because the two elements, two stages of Shabbos. It's because there are two interchangeable causes for why there's a Shabbos. First reason why Shabbos is a day that we should observe is because the Eibush granted it certain respect and made it into a great day. That was at the time of creation. Omnom. But when did Eibush give us an instruction? So the day of Shabbos is a special day from creation. But when did we get an instruction that we have to observe Shabbos? That is a result of the fact that we had been slaves in Egypt and then Eibush freed us. Why is that? The reason why Shabbos is something that belongs uniquely to the Jewish nation and not to the rest of the world is because even though everybody was created in the creation process and Hashem rested from that creation process on Shabbos, so you would think that Shabbos is a universal principle. So the Rambam explains, because we had been slaves in Egypt, which means we had no choice as to when we would work and how we would work, implying, of course, that we could never take a break. We couldn't take a break. Therefore, when the Eibush took us out of Mitzrayim, we who had suffered the inability to ever breathe now have to celebrate Shabbos to acknowledge that Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. Move on. That would explain why the mitzvah of Shabbos is so unique, different to any other mitzvah before the Torah was given. Because Shar mitzvahs, any other mitzvah, didn't exist before Matan Torah. The concept of that mitzvah was introduced at Sinai. And such a mitzvah entity did not exist. An entity that is a mitzvah entity was not a concept before the Torah was given. So there was no such thing as a pair of tefillin. There was no such thing as a matzah. There was no such thing as a mezuzah. Even though there were the spiritual intentions behind those things, but the actual mitzvah entity was only introduced at Matan Torah. So the only way that you could participate in a mitzvah when we say that the Avos and the Shvatim kept the entire Torah before it was given, that just means that there could be the human input. So you could do an action that replicates putting on tefillin, like Yaakov Avinu did by putting the sticks into the ground when he was mutating the sheep of Lavan, and thereby fulfilled the mitzvah of tefillin. But there's no concept of a pair of tefillin at that point in time. There's only the concept of human action. So there's no chefza, there's no entity that is holy. There's only the work of a gavra, of a person doing something of spiritual value. Shabbos is not that way. Mashenke b'Shabbos, because the uniqueness of the seventh day of the week is something that was already instituted at the time of creation. That David rested on that day. That means that the entity of a holy day of rest called Shabbos pre-exists before the giving of the Torah from the beginning of creation. The only thing is, it's just that we were not yet given an instruction how to behave in that special time. So therefore there is the entity of Shabbos as a holy day. There's not yet the entity of Shabbos as a mitzvah. That also helps us understand better why the reasoning behind the fact that a non-Jewish person may not keep Shabbos is learned from this idea of lo yishboisa, that you don't rest, which was told to Noach. that's a valid conversation to learn from the time of Noach. You'd ask, surely, if you're telling me that a non-Jewish person should not keep Shabbos, that's something that should be learned after Matan Torah. Well, we could learn it before Matan Torah because the entity of Shabbos already exists at that point in time. And therefore, the expression that we use about Yosef and his great commitment to Shabbos is he did Shabbos before it was given, not before it existed. Shabbos existed, but it hadn't yet been handed over to us as our responsibility. Even before we were given an instruction that these are the laws of Shabbos, Shabbos exists. It's an entity. It's part of the creative reality. Not only does Shabbos exist, but Shabbos exists in exactly the same way as it will exist after we're told how to behave on Shabbos. Shabbos doesn't change because we're now told how to behave. Shabbos was always holy and will continue to be holy. Miketz Shavakayim. It is a day that you're supposed to desist from work because that's how the Eibishter designed it from day 7 of creation. But what did we say Nesina is you have an object that is sitting in somebody else's property and possession. So Shabbos exists with all of its restrictions in the Eibishter's possession, so it doesn't yet have an impact on our lives. The definition of Shabbos prior to the giving of the Torah is it's a day of divine rest, no impact on humanity. But then the Eibishter gives us that Shabbos. He says, here's the day of rest, which I've had, so to speak, as my day of rest. Now I'm giving it to you, so it now becomes your day of rest. So now, Shabbos enters also into our reality, which means there's an impact on us, that we as humans now have rules that we have to obey in order to observe Shabbos. To say it differently, prior to Hashem, who is the one who instituted Shabbos by resting on Shabbos, until the Eibishter gives it to us, it has no value in our lives, has no relationship with us. It's the Eibishter's rest. To put it differently, a human cannot, this is an incredible thought, a human cannot, of their own volition, sort out their or choose to rest on Shabbos. A human being, you could choose whatever you want. You could decide that you're going to take off a day of the week. It's great. It's wonderful. It will help you be a healthy human being. But it will have nothing to do with Eibishter's experience of Shabbos, because a human being cannot create in their own space divine experiences. So therefore, the truth is you actually don't have the right to desist from work. You want to take it easy, but to start saying things like you're not going to flip on enough light switches, you don't have the authority for that. You do not have the capacity to bring into your life a divine experience of your own making. But when the Hashem gives us the Torah, then He gives us Shabbos, and all the details of Shabbos become ours. Because as we famously know, at the time of Matan Torah, the Eibishter broke down the barrier that prevented the higher realms entering our space and prevented the divine experience from being our experience. Especially when you consider Shabbos, which was already given to the Jewish people before Matan Torah, at Morah. The people were already given instructions at that point in time. And that would actually be similar to a bris milah, where the bris milah is the one unique mitzvah that actually has a physical impact even before the Torah was given, to translate the human body into becoming a holy entity, even though the Torah hadn't yet been given. So Shabbos has a similar thing that occurs at Morah. At the time of the giving of Shabbos, the Eibishter now gives us the uniqueness of the seventh day, Shabbos, the day of Shabbos that always existed, that it was always a time of desisting from work, now becomes ours as well. And that has an impact on us in our world. And that's what happened once the Torah was given. So all of the Shvatim and the Avos could keep Shabbos. It would not be a Hefzer Shel Mitzvah. It wouldn't be that the day had become their day of holiness. It would rather be that they avoided certain activities as part of their spiritual growth. Yosef is different. Here's where we see the uniqueness of the Shabbos experience that Yosef had compared to the Shabbos experience of his own brothers. Generally speaking, any of the mitzvahs that the Avos and the Shvatim did before Matan Torah, they were their volunteer activities, and therefore they can only have the impact that humans are capable of impacting, which of course is limited. But it was impossible for them to be able to change the nature of things, that they should become holy things. So let's say, for example, when Avraham Avinu is making matzah on Pesach, that matzah is no different to any other unleavened bread that he might have eaten any other day of the year, because it wasn't possible at that point to infuse holiness into the item that you were using. That is the gift of Matan Torah, and this is before Matan Torah. Did Avraham Avinu progress tremendously in his own spirituality because he had matzah on Pesach? Yes, but that didn't affect the physicality of this world. So likewise, when the Shvatim kept Shabbos, that was part of their spiritual growth, that they were becoming closer to the Eibishter because they were not doing certain activities on this day of Shabbos. But the fact that the day of Shabbos should be a holy day for humans was not something that they could affect. All they were doing is not working as a symbol of the fact that the Eibishter didn't work on this particular day. Yosef's different. The Torah specifies that Yosef kept Shabbos. That means that the Torah is telling us Yosef kept Shabbos the way Shabbos is kept by us after Matan Torah. Otherwise, the Torah wouldn't have drawn our attention to it. So therefore, that means that when Yosef is keeping Shabbos, the day of Shabbos in his reality is now a holy day, not just a day that he personally doesn't do certain activities. And not only that, it's a holy day with eternal status. Now the question is, why? What distinguishes Yosef from the other Shvatim? So for those of us who know what Chassidus says about the difference between Yosef and the Shvatim, this makes perfect sense. The explanation is this. We know that the advantage Yosef had spiritually over his brothers is that the brothers were shepherds. The whole purpose of being a shepherd is that it allows you the opportunity for seclusion, for meditation. You're not in the hustle and bustle of the city. It's very conducive to spiritual growth. So because the Shvatim spent their spiritual time away from the world, therefore they did not impact the physical world by their spiritual growth, and that includes Shabbos. So yes, they were acknowledging the fact that the Eibishter rested on the seventh day, and therefore they also rested, but it didn't actually impact the world. So the time of sunset on Friday to nightfall on Shabbos, Motzei Shabbos, that wasn't a different day for them. It was just different activities. Yosef has a completely different way of serving the Eibishter from within, in the thick of the materialism of this world, the most depraved place on earth, Egypt. Not only did living in that melting pot of hedonism, not only did it not distract him from serving the Eibishter, he becomes the controller of Egypt. He becomes the viceroy. Pari tells him, nobody's going to move a limb without your permission. He has absolute control over Mitzrayim. His control over Mitzrayim is not only in a physical sense that he provides food for the Egyptians, but he even has a spiritual impact on them, because we know that Yosef gets everybody in Mitzrayim to have a bris. So Yosef is a completely different spiritual experience to his brothers. His brothers have to escape the world in order to be spiritual, so therefore it's unlikely and it's unexpected that they would have an impact on the world. Yosef is completely invested in the physicality of this world in order to serve Hashem, and therefore he's able to elevate the world. And because Yosef is in Mitzrayim, and even before he became a big deal in Mitzrayim, he was still a slave to to Potiphar. If the Torah tells us that the Eibishter was with him. Because he's so connected to the Eibishter, and because he is investing and infusing holiness into the world, that's why he's able to manifest a real Shabbos experience even before it's been given. He's able not only to make a token behavior choice that reminds us that Hashem rested on the seventh day, but he's actually able to turn the day into a day of Shabbos. And that's why the greatness of Yosef is that his Shabbos observance, even before it's given, is very much along the lines of the kind of Shabbos that occurs after the Torah was given. And that will help us understand the question we asked right at the beginning of the Sikha. Why is that word v'hachein the clue that Yosef kept Shabbos properly? Which the Medrash associates with the story of preparing themselves to eat the man on Shabbos. So, as we've already pointed out, when a human being does not work on Shabbos, we see that the human being is different. The person is not working on this particular day. That doesn't tell me that the day is holy. That tells me that the person is not working. But if I'm standing a day beforehand and I'm making special preparations for the next day, that's illustrating that there's a time that is a special time, because look, I'm preparing for it. That tells me I have to prepare myself because a special time is coming. So on the day when you see me not working, you don't know that this is a special day. It could just be that I've decided I'm not working. But when it's the day beforehand and I'm making special preparations, that tells you this is obviously a special day. Shlomo, you just say to me, not only is it a preparation to tell me that will be a special day, but the truth is that preparation that I make seeps into Shabbos and helps define Shabbos, as we see in the beginning of the Gemara Beitzav. It's expressed in halacha as well. That same pasuk that we've just quoted, which says that they prepared themselves for Shabbos at the time of the Mon, there the Gemara Beitza learns, there the Gemara says it's not just good enough that we have to do the practical preparations for Shabbos, like cooking, etc., because we're not going to be able to do those things on Shabbos. Because that's actually Sharin and Zemafarish B'Kosov. That was already explained in the pasuk before it got to V'hoya B'yom HaShishi. It says, it tells Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Yidden, prepare what you got to prepare, cook what you got to cook, bake what you got to bake. But rather, as Rashi points out in the beginning of the Gemara over there, that what the Torah is telling us when it says Veichinu, it's telling us that it makes the Suda, the meals of Shabbos, into something which is important. What does important mean? That before Shabbos happens, you have to kind of allocate, or you've got to assign the meal for Shabbos, even if you're just saying this is for Shabbos food. In other words, this pasuk is telling us that the meals you eat on Shabbos are special meals. They have a certain distinction from any other meal of the week, because this is a special day which is unique compared to any other day of the week. That's why if the pasuk is going to tell us that Yosef prepares for Shabbos because it's a holy day, it's going to use this word hachein. Because what's unique about Shabbos is that the day becomes a special day, not just that you behave differently. How do you know that the day has become a special day, the day when the Eibishter rested from work? Because you have to prepare for it in a special way in advance. And that's what Yosef did. That's unique compared to his brothers, and that's why Yosef has access to Shabbos in its truest form, even before Shabbos was given en masse to everybody else. Now, that's how it is that we've seen two possibilities of how you keep Shabbos before the Torah was given. Now we've got to see what lesson that teaches us about how we keep Shabbos now that the Torah has been given. So the two ways, there's the way of the Shvatim, which is you just behave in a way that you desist from work, or the way of Yosef, in which the day itself becomes holy. Those two elements also play a role in Shabbos now, after the Torah has been given. The first element of Shabbos is very simple. There's Shabbos as it is expressed in the simple laws of how you keep Shabbos, which are you're not allowed to work. That's the simplest access point of Shabbos. Like the Shvatim, they just didn't work on Shabbos. But as Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, that there's also a spiritual, deeper part of guarding ourselves or resting on Shabbos, which is to avoid speaking in mundane conversations. Which means not only that we shouldn't talk more than necessary, as the Alter Rebbe says that clearly that we should not have conversations that are meaningless. That means that there's a deeper experience of Shabbos. It's not only about what you don't do, it's even about what you don't say. Now, why is that so significant? The reason a person would be cautious about what they say on Shabbos would be because they feel the Eibishter's rest on Shabbos. It's real to them. It's not just a theory. Which means not only that on the seventh day the Eibishter desisted from creating heaven and earth in a physical way, let's remember that the way that the Eibishter created the world was through speech. So if the Eibishter rests on the seventh day, that means that the Eibishter is no longer saying the Asar Maimoris, and we should be so conscious of that we don't say things which are mundane on Shabbos. So in the same way as the ultimate experience of keeping Shabbos before the Torah was given was Yosef's experience. Because Yosef was able to make the day a day that felt like the day of divine rest. The same thing applies to how we keep Shabbos post Matan Torah. That what does it really mean to keep Shabbos in the ultimate sense? Not just to avoid things which are inappropriate, actions that we're not supposed to do, or even things that we're not supposed to say. But really, the ultimate way to keep Shabbos is that we should feel this is the Eibishter's special day. As Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that really what's supposed to happen on Shabbos is it should be a day of investment in our davening, focused, contemplative davening, and investment in our Torah learning. As the pasuk tells us, it's Shabbos, a day for the Eibishter, not a day for ourselves to catch up on sleep and eat more dessert. And through that commitment to keeping Shabbos properly and being aligned with the fact that this is the Eibishter's Shabbos, that will immediately bring the Gula with Mashiach, as the famous Gemara goes, that if only the Yidden would have kept two Shabbos, and we know that we can achieve that now in a single Shabbos, miyad nigolim will immediately be redeemed with Mashiach.